Hello, this is Stephen Barnett. I'm the coordinator of the Bob VCSE Health Alliance. Bob stands for Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire West, which means Wokingham, Reading and West Berkshire. VCSE stands for what it says here on the screen, Voluntary Community and Social Enterprise Sector within Bob ICS. And there is another acronym, Integrated Care System. That's an ICS. We asked our alliance members to share their impressions of their experiences of working within the new integrated care system during June 2023. I think it's only fair to report back on what you all said. And I hope that that's useful not only for myself and my alliance colleagues to be able to share these insights with our NHS friends and colleagues, but also for yourselves to do that as part of the VCSE sector and as leaders in it. So I'm going to run through a few slides here. So this is who responded. I'm happy we had a good range of organizations with different focus areas around the alliance, so not just those within our 3 action groups on aging well, learning disability and autism, and mental health, but a range of, and our steering group, whose organizations mainly do VCSE training, capacity building, but also some others as well. It wasn't really possible in a short form that we wanted to be quite quick to include all of the different missions that charities might have within Bob, but I realized that list might be a little bit limiting. In fact, I know it is, because lots of people made more specific points in the comment field about that. But anyway, the point is that there was a good range of respondents here to this survey, and there were 77 responses overall. Also, in terms of size of organisation, so we know from the research mapping report by Professor Tony Chapman that we published at the end of June that there's a big range of different sizes of organisations, and actually most are very small and volunteer-led. So we actually, you can see that in our survey responses, we have about a quarter of them from organisations with turnover that's over $1 million, and the fact is that we are attracting to the alliance larger voluntary sector organisations that have the capacity, the bandwidth, the leadership level to engage with us. So we do recognise that we're not hearing directly from as many of these smaller and medium-sized organisations, but there is a reasonable range here. Let's go on to the next one. So 77 responses. What did they say? This slide shows an indication of the kinds of relationships that exist between the VCSE sector, voluntary organisations, charities, and the statutory partners, so the upper tier local authorities and the NHS. Now, this is a slightly blunt instrument, to be frank, this survey, because we didn't specify which NHS body was meant, nor did we specify which council. So these are general impressions. I think there's 2 quite interesting things here, 3 actually. One is that we're very interconnected and interdependent as a system. And so by extension, our population are dependent on the quality of our relationships across these 5 areas: referrals, consultation, commissioning, supporting access. Across each of the 5 points, we asked in a multi-choice question, more VCSE organisations relate to their upper tier councils than to the NHS. So it's across the board, the depth and breadth of relationships with councils are stronger than with the NHS, and that'll be borne out in some of the later slides as well. Also, the number of VCSE organisations which have both a commissioning and a referral relationship with councils is very close at 52 and 57. But if you look at the relationship, commissioning relationship with the NHS and referrals into VSE, there's a significant gap there, 27 to 44. So lots of referrals from the NHS, but fewer organisations having a commissioning relationship. And now some of this, and it would be a fair point to say, would be explained by the relative statutory duties of councils and the NHS, but it's interesting to think together about what the wider explanations for this might be. Then that's about the kinds of relationships that the voluntary sector has with councils and NHS. If we then look on to ask a subjective question of VCSE organisations about the quality of those relationships, having established that the kinds of relationships are quite broad, we can see that overall VCSE leaders are rating their relationship with councils about a point higher out of 10 than with the NHS. And maybe that reflects the same kind of point as on the previous slide. Voluntary sector organisations more used to working with councils more used to working with voluntary sector, NHS voluntary sector not so much, more specialised, somewhat reflective of statutory duties, but possibly not only. There's a lot of variety in these scales and in the questions, and because it's a sample size of 77, we felt able to dig a little bit deeper and look for some patterns or correlations. And I don't claim this is particularly scientific, but we will just dig into this a little bit, and you can decide whether it reflects your experience and reality of how you work with NHS and councils. So we looked for various different kinds of variables to explain the difference in the quality of relationship with NHS and quality of council. We looked at geography and didn't find a huge difference between the three places. We then looked at turnover. What I've shown here is that there's a relationship between voluntary sector organisations and the council, the gap between the medium small organisations, so we've drawn the cutoff point here at 250k, and those over 250k doesn't produce a vast difference in how well you can relate to your local council. But if you take that into the NHS area, then you do get quite a substantial difference of over 1.5 out of 10. So I think what this is telling us is that voluntary sector organisations are having a harder time developing quality relationship with the NHS if when they're smaller and medium-sized compared to the medium to larger ones. And again, that might be to do with statutory duties, but I think it's worth thinking about how in the new context of the ICS, NHS bodies can relate to VCSE organisations and vice versa, of the smaller scale of our sector. We also asked the question about do you have a commissioning relationship with the council or the NHS? And this produces a similar kind of split between those that are commissioned and those that aren't. So, and I think I'm afraid I think the numbers on this slide are still slightly wrong, but basically in the absolute numbers on the bottom axis there, but broadly it still tells us that if you're not commissioned by the NHS, then you're struggling to get a quality relationship. But actually, if you are commissioned by the NHS, then you rate the relationship significantly more highly. That's above the average even for relationship with councils, which was at 6.9 for the 30 or so organisations that have an NHS commissioning relationship. You can see that the relationship with councils is very close, 7.3, 7.4. The quality rating is very, very close. Also, these quality ratings are from the VCSE side. We don't know what the view of our council counterparts and our NHS counterparts would be on the quality of relationship with VCSE. But there's a big gap here again between, if you're not commissioned by the NHS, your quality rating of the relationship is really quite low, at 4.8 rather than 7.4. That's a big gap, and it's worth thinking about how we deal with that in future. We asked a big picture question here, which is the same one that we asked last July and August when we did this survey, and had a bit of a smaller number of responses. I think about 50 responses back then, and now it's 77. But you can see that the optimism has gone up a little bit. So we ask, how optimistic are you about the VCSE sector playing a full role in the new Bob integrated care system? Last summer, it was a case of glass half empty. This summer, it looks more like the glass is half full, and even a little bit more, which is, so it's good to see some progress, but it's, half empty, half full. That's not where everyone wants to be. Everybody wants to be doing better than that. So, question to the VCSE colleagues in the survey: what would increase your optimism? Now, then there's an open text box, and there's a lot of qualitative answers, and I've tried to make sense of this by looking at patterns and doing some grouping of the responses. So top one here, about 18 people pointing to this as what would increase your optimism would be commissioning and funding, transparency, openness around commissioning and funding arrangements. Co-production comes into this, being able to actually design the services and programs so that they're using VCSE insight into particular population groups and service users, so that the services are what people actually need and are deliverable. The next one is greater engagement at all levels. So we've been trying to do this as the Alliance, but it's we can't rely only on a system level alliance of VCSE organizations. This has to be happening at all kinds of levels, from neighborhoods and in all kinds of specialist service areas. So this is what's wanted: listening, feedback, openness to difficult conversations. Next two that are equal on 14 people mentioning them: improved NHS understanding of the value of the VCSE at a small scale local level. So this isn't about commissioning. This is, about understanding that how community life works, how community groups work in terms of being led by volunteers and activists, and valuing that, recognizing it as different. And some of these organizations are not going to be into a commissioning relationship with complex contracts, but just want to be a little bit more support and recognition for for the quality of what they do, and their sort of their commitment and their professionalism. The next one is the maturity and stability of ICS structures and leadership. Now, lots of the ICS structures are still bedding down and being clarified, and they're people are conscious of gaps, and how do we fit this bit together with that bit. That conversation is very much happening. We had Nick Broughton speak to our recent June members event on the 29th of June, and I think that helped, because people are also seeing the sort of the turnover of CEO and chair of the ICB, and the number of people on interim posts and contracts, and that's affecting their confidence about the future of the system. And then the fifth point in here it's a bit of a catch-all, but it is about the understanding of our client group and complexity, and lots of voluntary sector organizations doing great work with a particular part of the population, and feeling that that group's complex needs and specific characteristics are not being well understood by system partners that are speaking to them. So that's one of them. But there was a number of quite specific points within that I tried to summarize. So hopefully that gives you a sense of what Alliance members said in the Bob VCSE Alliance member survey in June 2023. Thanks for now. Bye.